The dark truth behind the Terminator. You think the Terminator is just an action classic, machines, explosions, chase scenes, and Arnold's famous one-liners. But behind the steel and gunfire was something far more dangerous. Real pain, real blood, and secrets buried for 40 years. This is the Terminator you were never meant to know. Welcome back to Classic Hollywood, where the truth behind the legends finally comes alive. They filmed it in secret. They filmed it fast, and they filmed it in absolute silence. Not because it sounded dramatic, but because if anyone had heard them, the entire movie could have been shut down. Linda Hamilton once said, "I didn't even get to see that scene until the day the movie premiered." That's how secret it was. It wasn't just another late-night shoot. It was a covert operation. At 1 a.m., deep in the backstreets of Los Angeles, the crew moved like ghosts. No permits, no police clearance. Every light, every camera, every footstep, hidden. If a single neighbor looked out their window, if a single patrol car turned the corner, it was over. And in the middle of it all stood Arnold Schwarzenegger, completely naked, his body glistening under a freezing street lamp. There was no green screen, no controlled studio. Just the open city, the smell of asphalt, and the sound of the wind. They couldn't afford to block traffic or hire security, so they worked in the shadows, praying no one would call the cops to report a naked man covered in smoke. Linda Hamilton later admitted, "I wasn't even allowed near the set that night. When I finally saw it in theaters, I realized that wasn't just acting. That was insanity. And that wasn't the only danger hiding behind the camera." One of the stuntmen, Reese's double, had to jump 7 meters straight down onto bare concrete. No safety rig, no crash pad. Just a few thin wooden boards laid on the ground to soften the impact board so flimsy everyone thought they'd splinter on contact. When he leapt, the entire crew froze. For a split second, they thought they'd just witnessed a man die for a movie. But somehow, he landed hard, rolled, and stood up. No CGI, no body double. Just raw, human impact. And that same night, another accident almost changed history. During a gun handling stunt, Arnold grabbed the real weapon instead of the prop. The metal slammed against his hand with such force that 3 of his fingers nearly shattered. He didn't scream. He didn't stop. He just clenched his jaw, reset, and said, "Let's go again." And above all of them, orchestrating this madness, was James Cameron, the man who refused to play safe. He wasn't the kind of director who hid behind a monitor. He was out there in the chaos, crawling through debris, shouting through the noise, chasing perfection at any cost. Later, Arnold said, Cameron would risk his own life before he asked someone else to. And he proved it when he literally stood beneath a helicopter's spinning blades to film a shot himself. The pilot refused. The crew refused. Everyone thought it was suicide. But Cameron just looked up, grabbed the camera, and said, "Give it to me. I'll shoot it." That's the kind of fire that built the Terminator. Not digital magic. Not studio safety nets. Just guts, adrenaline, and pure obsession. It wasn't movie magic. It was madness turned into art. But that was only the beginning. Because when the cast finally began to talk, decades later, one story in particular hit harder than all the rest. The story of a scene that was erased from history. Michael Biehn, the man who brought Kyle Reese to life, revealed something few fans ever knew. A moment that showed a side of Reese no one had ever seen before. Not the soldier, not the hero, but the man broken, human, fragile. He said, "It was the most emotional scene I ever filmed." But if you watch the movie today, you'll never find it. Because James Cameron cut it completely. It happened one quiet afternoon during the shoot. The chaos of explosions and gunfire paused, and the crew set up in a small forest clearing just outside Los Angeles. No robots, no chases, no special effects. Just Michael, alone, sitting by a stream. He was meant to be resting, but as the camera rolled, something raw took over. He wasn't Kyle Reese anymore. He was a man who'd seen too much death, too much darkness. Michael said, "He sits there, touching the sunlight, watching it pass through the trees, realizing this is what his world has lost forever. He knows he's in paradise, but it's a paradise already doomed. And that's when it hits him. The future he came to stop is still coming. All his fighting, all his pain, may not change a thing. He said, "I wasn't acting. I really cried." And the crew stood there in silence. No one dared interrupt him. Because it wasn't performance anymore. It was confession. But when the film went into editing, Cameron made a decision that would haunt him for years. He cut it out, not because Michael failed, but because he believed audiences weren't ready to see Reese weak. They needed a hero who never broke, a soldier who never cried. And so, the most human moment in the film was buried, gone without a trace. No copy, no leaked footage, no deleted scene, just a memory carried by the people who were there that day. Michael later said, "They erased the one moment that showed who Reese really was, a soldier not made of steel, but of sorrow." And in that choice, the Terminator became something even more tragic. A movie about machines that feel nothing, created by humans who weren't allowed to feel everything. That's the irony James Cameron never spoke about publicly. Behind the story of an emotionless machine was an entire cast forced to hide their emotions too. It wasn't just acting, it was survival inside Hollywood's own machine. After that lost scene, you'd think the most powerful moments in The Terminator came from grand speeches or emotional outbursts. But the truth is the exact opposite. The most unforgettable performance in the entire film came from a man who barely spoke at all. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the face of the unstoppable machine, once said something that perfectly captured the secret of his character. "I only spoke 58 words, and the whole world heard me." That's all it took. 58 words. No monologues. No explanations. Just cold, mechanical phrases carved into cinema history. When Arnold first flipped through the script, he thought there was a mistake. He kept turning pages, expecting dialogue. But there was almost nothing. A line here, a command there, silence in between. He finally counted them all. 58. 58 words to create one of the most terrifying presences ever seen on screen. And when he asked James Cameron why, Cameron smiled and said, "The Terminator doesn't need to explain anything. It just needs to show up." That was the philosophy that changed action cinema forever. Because when a character says less, the audience imagines more. Every pause becomes a threat. Every step, a sentence. Every look, a warning. The T-800 didn't talk its way into your nightmares, it walked there. Cameron understood something few directors did. Silence can be louder than gunfire. So he turned the Terminator into a walking nightmare. One that spoke only when absolutely necessary. And when it did speak, every word hit like a bullet. "I'll be back." 3 words that changed pop culture forever. They weren't written to be catchy. They weren't even meant to be funny. They were designed to sound like inevitability. A promise, not a threat. A line so simple, yet so cold, that it stopped audiences in their tracks. Cameron later said, "The fewer lines Arnold had, the stronger he became. The absence of emotion became its own emotion. The lack of humanity became unforgettable humanity." And behind that, there was an even stranger story. The crew once debated whether to delete an entire sequence because it might have taught audiences something too dangerous. A scene where the Terminator uses its weapons with chilling efficiency in a way that could be imitated in real life. Cameron refused to glorify it. He changed camera angles, rewrote beats, and cut frames, not to protect the image of a robot, but to protect real people from copying it. That's the hidden side of The Terminator. A movie about death, created by people who were constantly fighting to keep it from becoming real. And yet, that very restraint is what made Arnold's Terminator legendary. A character with almost no dialogue who somehow said everything. Power, fear, precision. A symbol of unstoppable fate, expressed in less than 60 words. It's a reminder that in the right hands, silence isn't emptiness, it's power. And that's why, 4 decades later, those 58 words still echo louder than most entire screenplays. You remember her, don't you? Sarah Connor, the terrified waitress who became the mother of the future. Running through alleys, screaming for her life, refusing to stop, even when every muscle in her body begged her to collapse. She looked invincible, but what you didn't know was that every time Linda Hamilton ran from the Terminator, she was fighting something far more real than a machine. She was running on a broken leg. Years later, Linda confessed the secret the crew had tried to hide. When she first accepted the role, she was already injured. A fractured ankle, swollen, bruised, and barely holding her weight. But the production schedule couldn't stop. The studio was running out of time. And Linda Hamilton, the newcomer who'd just been given her biggest role, refused to hold anyone back. So she made a choice. No stunt doubles, no rewrites, no excuses. She wrapped her ankle tight, gritted her teeth, and said, "Let's keep shooting." End quote. Every chase scene you see, every moment she stumbles, gasps, and pushes herself forward, wasn't acting. It was pain. Real, searing pain. She said, "When I ran, it felt like fire shooting up my leg. Every step felt like it might snap again." But she didn't stop. She couldn't, because Sarah Connor wasn't supposed to break, and neither was Linda. During one of the longest chase sequences, her bandages came loose mid-shot. She could feel the joint grinding. Cameron yelled, "Keep rolling!" And she did, sprinting through the frame, her throat burning as she tried not to scream. When the cameras finally cut, the set went silent. Even the crew looked shaken, because no one there could tell where Sarah Connor ended and where Linda Hamilton began. She later said, "I didn't have to pretend to be terrified. I was terrified of the pain, of falling, of failing. But the result? Those scenes are some of the most intense, most human moments in action cinema history." That's why when you rewatch The Terminator today, and you see Sarah Connor limping, stumbling, still forcing herself to move, you're not watching an actress faking fear. You're watching a woman who refused to let a broken bone stop her from making history. It's no wonder she became one of cinema's most powerful female icons. Because her strength wasn't written in the script, it was real, forged in pain, filmed through tears, and immortalized in every frame. And Linda never forgot that experience. She said, "Sarah was running for her life, and so was I from my own body." That's the thing about the making of The Terminator. Everyone in it, from Arnold to Linda, was living their own version of the story. Machines breaking humans, and humans fighting back. For most of us watching The Terminator for the first time, the name James Cameron was just a credit at the start of the movie, a name that flashed by before the chaos began. We didn't know him. We didn't see him. We just saw the result, the cold precision, the relentless pacing, the nightmare that felt too real. But behind those frames was a man who refused to sit safely behind the camera. A man who believed that if his actors were risking everything, he had to risk it too. Arnold Schwarzenegger once said, "Cameron didn't just direct action scenes, he lived inside them." And nowhere was that truer than during one of the most dangerous moments ever captured on film. The helicopter scene from Terminator 2. It was supposed to be simple on paper. A low-flying helicopter, a blazing chase through the city, the camera positioned underneath to catch the machine's descent. But when they started planning it, every single cameraman refused. Too close, too fast, too deadly. If the pilot misjudged the height by even a few feet, the rotor blades would slice through the crew. One small mistake, and everyone under it would die instantly. Cameron listened quietly. Then he walked forward, looked up at the spinning blades, and said words that froze everyone on set. "Give me the camera." No argument. No second thought. He strapped in, positioned himself directly under the helicopter's path. No barrier, no safety cage, just raw courage and a rolling camera. Arnold said later, "I honestly thought I was about to watch my director die." As the helicopter roared overhead, the blades came so close to Cameron that the downwash nearly threw him off balance. But he didn't flinch. He just kept filming, eyes locked on the frame, hands steady, capturing the shot exactly as he'd envisioned it. When it was over, he stood up, dusted himself off, and said calmly, "Okay, we got it." No bragging, no celebration, just that. That was James Cameron, the man who believed that if danger didn't feel real to the people making the movie, it wouldn't feel real to the people watching it. Arnold said, "He's not just directing the danger, he becomes it." And that's why every second of the Terminator in T2 still feels alive. Because the man behind the camera wasn't faking it, he was living it. It's easy to forget that long before he was a Hollywood legend, Cameron was just a truck driver with a dream. He had no safety nets, no big studio protecting him, no Hollywood armor. So when he finally got his shot, he put every ounce of his fearlessness into the frame, even if it meant putting his own life on the line. That helicopter scene wasn't just another action shot. It was a message, a reminder that true filmmaking isn't made of comfort, it's made of risk. And Cameron's risk became one of the most iconic, heart-stopping moments in movie history. He didn't just film a chase. He filmed a man's obsession with perfection, with realism, with truth. That's the real James Cameron, a director who didn't just capture danger, he stood inside it. Everyone remembers that moment. The flames fade, the skin burns away, and from the fire, the T-800 rises red eyes, glowing, steel glinting in the dark. For millions of moviegoers, that image became the very definition of science fiction horror. The perfect machine, cold, precise, unstoppable. But here's the truth that almost no one knew until the people who built it started talking. That terrifying metal skeleton wasn't born in some massive Hollywood workshop. There were no high-tech labs, no armies of engineers. It was created in a cheap hotel room. Stan Winston, the man who would later become a legend in Hollywood special effects, still remembered it vividly. He said, "We didn't have a studio. We didn't have a crew. It was just me, Jim, and a lot of napkins." James Cameron and Stan Winston were nobodies back then. No one in the industry believed in them. No studio wanted to give them real resources. But Cameron had a vision, a nightmare made of chrome and fire. He told Stan, "Imagine a steel skeleton walking out of the flames, not a robot, but a nightmare that used to be human." So there they were, two dreamers in a cramped hotel room, barely big enough for a bed and two suitcases. Cameron paced the carpet, describing the movements, the posture, the gleam of metal beneath charred skin. Winston sat on the edge of the bed, sketching every detail on whatever he could find. Napkins, scraps of paper, even the cardboard backs of notepads. No fancy light tables, no drafting boards, just cheap pencils and the hum of a flickering lamp. They scavenged whatever they could. Broken plastic, bits of metal, spare screws from old equipment. Every small piece became part of a greater monster. They built prototypes right there on the hotel carpet, bending wires, gluing fragments, assembling the bones of what would soon become cinema's most feared machine. Winston laughed years later, saying, "We were sitting on the floor surrounded by junk, but in our heads, we were building history." And they were right, because out of that dingy little room came something that looked too real for its time. When the T-800 finally stepped onto the screen, its jaws clicking, its eyes glowing like molten metal, audiences couldn't believe it wasn't computer-generated. But it wasn't. It was built by hand, piece by piece, by two men who had nothing but imagination, sleepless nights, and stubborn willpower. That hotel room became the birthplace of one of cinema's most iconic monsters. A machine so realistic that even today, 40 years later, it still chills anyone who sees it stride through the flames. It's poetic, really. The ultimate symbol of technology created in the most low-tech place imaginable, a future forged out of desperation. And maybe that's what made it perfect. Because like the story itself, the T-800 wasn't born in comfort. It was built in struggle. And that struggle gave it a soul, a mechanical, merciless soul that still haunts Hollywood to this day. When Terminator 2, Judgment Day exploded into theaters in 1991, it changed everything. Bigger, louder, smarter. It was the rare sequel that didn't just match the first film, it reinvented what action could be. And right in the middle of it all was a scene burned into the memory of an entire generation. Arnold on a roaring Harley-Davidson, one hand gripping the handlebar, the other spinning a Winchester 1887 shotgun in a flawless 360-degree reload. Click, cock, boom. It looked effortless, mechanical, perfect. But what no one in the audience ever saw was how close that moment came to ending in disaster. Arnold later admitted, "I practiced that spin hundreds of times. I wanted it to look like the weapon was part of the machine." He trained for weeks with a specially modified prop. Lightweight, balanced, safe, every movement was choreographed. The turn of the wrist, the arc of the barrel, the timing of the reload. And then, one day on set, in the middle of a hectic reshoot, he reached for the gun resting on the stand beside the camera and picked up the wrong one. It wasn't the prop. It was the real Winchester. He didn't realize it until it was too late. The metal was heavier, the mechanism stiffer. When he spun it, the weight slammed down with brutal force hard enough to jolt his entire arm. He felt a sharp crack shoot through his hand. For a second, he thought he'd broken it. The set froze. The medics rushed in. Arnold's fingers were already swelling, trembling from the impact. The doctor examined him and said a sentence that Arnold still remembers. "If you had spun it just a little harder, 3 of your fingers would have been crushed." 3 fingers, gone. And with them, the most iconic moment in Terminator 2, maybe the most iconic moment in his entire career. Arnold laughed about it years later, but at the time he was pale, shaken, silent. He said, "People thought I was acting tough for the camera, but in that shot, I was just trying to keep my hand together." After that, he went right back to work, bandaged, sore, determined, because the shot had to be real. And when the camera finally rolled again, that spin, the one that nearly ended his hand, became one of the coolest, most imitated moves in action cinema. Kids copied it with toy guns. Fans studied it frame by frame. It became legend. But behind that smooth motion was pain. Behind that effortless cool was a moment of real fear. That's the paradox of the Terminator. Every frame that looks invincible was built on someone's vulnerability. Every perfect shot carried the risk of blood. And for Arnold, that single spin became the price of perfection, proof that even the strongest machine on screen was still powered by something painfully, beautifully human. Just when you think the stories from the Terminator couldn't get any more intense, there's one moment that takes brutality to a whole new level. A scene that looked like pure Hollywood action, but behind the camera, it was something far more dangerous. Michael Biehn, the man who played Kyle Reese, once revealed the truth that few dared to admit. The factory fight scene where Reese swings a metal pipe at the T-800 wasn't done with rubber props. It was real steel. Why? Because the movie didn't have the budget for anything else. The film that would one day redefine science fiction was, at the time, running on fumes. Every dollar mattered. Every shortcut could be the difference between finishing the movie or not. So, when they needed that authentic metallic clang, a young effects artist named Tom Woodruff Jr. stepped up. He placed his own hand in the shot, the hand that would take the blow just to make sure the camera caught the perfect impact. Arnold raised the pipe. The lights burned hot. The set fell silent. And when the metal came down, everyone heard it. A sharp, brutal crack. Tom's hand instantly turned purple. His fingers went numb. The nerves were crushed. But there was no insurance, no compensation, no retake. He simply smiled through the pain, terrified to lose his job. Michael Biehn still remembers it vividly. He said, "That's when I realized the Terminator wasn't just a movie. It was blood, sweat, and real pain." And maybe that's the secret. Maybe that's why the film still feels alive 40 years later. Because it wasn't built with green screens or CGI. It was built with risk, with sacrifice, with human beings giving everything they had for something that might have failed. That's what made it immortal. A small film made by people who refused to quit, who literally bled for the vision James Cameron had scribbled on a napkin in a hotel room. When you watch The Terminator today, you're not just seeing a movie. You're seeing a time capsule, The moment Hollywood learned that heart, grit, and madness could turn a low-budget nightmare into a timeless legend. And that's the story behind the Terminator, the film that was born in chaos, built in danger, and became an icon. If this took you back to the golden age of true filmmaking where sweat and fear built legends, then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Classic Hollywood, and ring the bell so you never miss another story from the shadows of movie history. Which behind-the-scenes secret shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. This is Classic Hollywood, where every frame has a heartbeat and every legend has a story.